This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website building platform to bring your business to life and succeed online, all in one place and all on your terms. Hello everyone, Blind Dweller here, and welcome to part 2 of the shocking life and performance art of Marina Abramović. Last time we looked into the early life of Marina, as well as a brief look into how she discovered art and later performance art while she was ending her studies, in hopes to get a better understanding of her psyche, as well as why exactly performance art proved to be such an alluring concept for her. In this video, we're getting fully into the swing of things now and taking a look at the performance art itself, starting with her earliest performances that also happen to rank as some of her most intense and controversial series of work, titled the Rhythm Series. So I've had a really interesting mix of reactions to this documentary already, and I haven't even got into the controversial stuff yet. But I assure you all of that changes now. From this episode onwards, we'll be looking in detail at a lot of Marina's most infamous work, and probably more towards the end of this series, we'll be looking into just how that has impacted the wider audiences of the world, as well as a brief look at the more, shall we say, wilder allegations against her. Thank you so much to everyone who's stayed with me for part 2, and if you're new here and stumbled across this video, first of all, a big welcome to you. Secondly, you might want to watch my part 1 video first before continuing with this one, just to give yourself a bit of context behind what exactly you're getting yourself into here. Also be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell to see more content from me on the weird and wonderful side of art. With that said, let's waste no more time. Welcome to another video everyone. This is part 2 of the life and performance art of Marina Abramović. At the beginning of the 1970s, after marrying and completing her studies in art, Marina Abramović was taking her first steps as a full-time artist, though very little was changing in her life whilst remaining in her hometown of Belgrade in Yugoslavia. Marina still remained close to her former classmates from art school and continued to do various local exhibitions with them, mostly within the Student Cultural Center in Belgrade, experimenting with visual effects and audio recordings, as well as putting her body through strange displays, such as wrapping her entire body in tape that would garner a wide range of reactions, from mesmerized to straight up repulsed. However, one visiting curator from Scotland was about to propel Marina's position within the art world further than she could have ever anticipated. Richard DeMarco, a Scottish artist and promoter of the visual and performing arts, was visiting Belgrade looking for fresh ideas for the next Edinburgh Art Festival. After a fairly uneventful trip, word eventually got round to him about a small group of postgraduate art students, Marina Abramović included, who were doing something far more outlandish and experimental compared to what the painting and sculpting scene could offer. With only one night left in Belgrade, he invited them to his hotel room to meet them, before travelling home the next day. Despite a fruitful meeting and an invitation for the group to attend the Edinburgh Festival, the Yugoslavian government officials escorting him bluntly refused, claiming that this kind of art would not appropriately represent the culture of the country. Following this, DeMarco decided to formally invite the group to make their own way to Scotland to attend the festival. Thankfully, Marina had saved up enough money to make the trip, and she didn't look back. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. After arriving in Edinburgh, she was invited to stay with friends of DeMarco, and she quickly got to work planning a performance for the festival, and already she was beginning to feel the pressure. This was her very first trip to the West as an artist, suddenly surrounded by some of the world's most infamous conceptual artists that would even make Marina's most shocking work look tame by comparison. Such as a team of performers that included Günter Blues, who just a few years prior at the University of Vienna had conducted a performance that involved urinating into a glass, then proceeding to cover his body in his own excrement, singing the Austrian national anthem, whilst basically pleasuring himself. Never before had Marina felt like such a small fish in a very large and unpredictable pond. But nevertheless, she knew she was brought here for a reason. She knew she had something to offer that was different. And it was in fact her fortitude in the face of fear, her composure in the face of intimidation, and even extreme danger that would eventually lead her to her very first installment of arguably her most notorious body of work. Okay, so before I get into the details of Rhythm 10, I need to own up to quite an embarrassing mistake I made in part 1 of this ongoing documentary. Towards the end of the last video, I accidentally said that Rhythm 10 involved 12 knives instead of 10, which is straight up incorrect, and I'm still baffled as to how I said that and didn't even notice it during editing. Maybe 12 and 10 sounded similar to me at the time, I don't know. But I thought I'd mention this now just because the number of knives that Marina used is quite significant to the concept, and even the very title of the performance. So now that that's hopefully cleared up any potential confusion, let's continue. On the floor of the gymnasium of Melville College, one of the sites of the Edinburgh Festival, Marina Abramović unrolled a big sheet of heavy white paper, and on top, she would rest a collection of 10 knives of various sizes, with 2 tape recorders set aside. The stage was now set for Rhythm 10. Even by Marina's own admission, she knew what she was about to do was completely unhinged, and would retell this event in quite a gripping way. Quote, "Rhythm 10 was absolutely crazy. It was based on a drinking game played by Russian and Yugoslav peasants. You spread your fingers out on a wooden bar or table and stab down a sharp knife, fast, in the spaces between your fingers. Every time you miss and cut yourself, you have to take another drink. The drunker you get, the more likely you are to stab yourself. Like Russian roulette, it is a game of bravery and foolishness and despair and darkness. The perfect Slavic game. Beforehand, I was so nervous that I was scared I would get one of my incapacitating whole-body migraines. I could hardly breathe from the idea that I was going to do this. But I was also serious about what I was about to do, 100% committed. I was so serious about everything then, yet I think I needed this gravity. Much later on, I read a statement of Bruce Nauman's Art is a Matter of Life and Death. It sounds melodramatic, but it's so true. This was exactly how it was for me, even at the beginning. Art was life and death. There was nothing else. It was so serious and so necessary. With a big crowd watching, I knelt down on the paper and turned on one of the tape recorders. I had been terrified beforehand, but the second I began, my fear evaporated. The space I occupied was safe." End quote. As the performance was in full swing, Marina brought the knives down between her fingers on her left hand as fast as she could. And of course, because she was going fast, every once in a while she would miss, just slightly, and nick herself. Each time she did so, she would groan with pain. The tape recorder would pick it up, and she would switch to the next knife. After nicking herself 10 times with each knife, she would switch on the second tape recorder whilst replaying the tape of the first recorder in an attempt to repeat the same movements, attempting even to replicate the mistakes with each of the 10 knives again, merging the past with the present. Quote, "Pretty soon I had gone through all 10 knives, and the white paper was stained very impressively with my blood. I rewound the second tape recorder, played a double soundtrack of both performances. Then, I stood up and left. The crowd stared, dead silent, and a very strange feeling came over me, something I had never dreamed of. It was as if electricity was running through my body, and the audience and I had become one, a single organism. The sense of danger in the room had united the onlookers and me in that moment, the here and now, and nowhere else. That thing that each of us loves, with that you are your own little self privately. Once you step into the performance space, you are acting from a higher self, and it's not you anymore. It's not the you that you know, it's something else. There on the gymnasium floor, it was as if I'd become, at the same time, a receiver and transmitter of huge, Tesla-like energy. The fear was gone, the pain was gone. I'd become Marina, whom I didn't know yet. Listening to the wild applause of the audience, I knew I had succeeded in creating an unprecedented unity of time present and time past, with random errors. I had experienced absolute freedom. I felt that my body was without boundaries, limitless. This was the moment I knew I had found my medium." End quote. Following the shock and the afterglow she experienced from her first ever solo performance as Marina Abramović with Rhythm 10, the last thing Marina wanted to do was go back to the more conservative art scene of Belgrade when the festival was over. Despite staying for as long as she could in the UK, working various jobs, it would not last. Her mother, Danica, found her a new teaching job back home, and she had to return to her home country once again. With the freedom she craved as both an artist and as a person, seeming to only last moments each time during this particular period of her life. But her head was still full of ideas for her next performance projects. She continued to save money with her new well-paid job in order to fund them. In fact, she would even get the chance to perform Rhythm 10 once again in Rome, this time using 20 knives instead of 10. And she would even receive a bigger reaction from the audience than before back in Scotland. The more like-minded artists she began to meet along the way, the more opportunities seemed to arise, and the more support she would receive to materialize her ideas, which would eventually lead her to begin her next controversial chapter within the Rhythm series, known as Rhythm 5. Quote, "The 5 in the title stood for the 5-pointed star. For 2 stars, really. There was the large 5-pointed wooden star I planned to build in the courtyard of a student cultural centre. And then there was the starfish-like extremities of my body, as I would lie inside it, my head and my outstretched arms and legs." End quote. Again, Abramović seemed obsessed to explore a theme of the body at its most challenged in the face of danger and how an audience would interact, to a point when even fellow conceptual artists were warning her to be careful or to abandon the idea altogether. But nevertheless, the project would continue. The performance began with Abramović constructing the star made of wood and wood chips soaked in gasoline. She then lit the star on fire and proceeded to walk around it. She then cut her hair and threw clumps of it into the fire. Then finally, she lay down, right inside of a burning star. Abramović remained in the star for a total of 6 minutes, until the flames eventually reached her leg. The audience then realised to their horror in that moment, when she didn't flinch, that she was unconscious from a lack of oxygen inside the burning star. The doctors on standby then stepped in, and with the help of the audience, she was rescued from the flames that were practically only minutes away from killing her. One question you may have is, why did Abramović choose a star as a symbol for the performance? She would explain herself in her autobiography, titled Walk Through Walls, that the star had always fascinated her for its many meanings throughout history, within culture and religion, such as with ancient Egypt, paganism, and Abrahamic religions. The star has always been a significant symbol with different interpretations. But first and foremost, the star was quite simply a symbol of communism, and due to her upbringing and past experiences living in Belgrade, it in turn served as a symbol of oppression, totalitarianism, and of a world that she was so desperately trying to escape from. Despite the near disaster that came from the performance of Rhythm 5, according to Marina, It became quite a sensational hit, not just for the daringness of the artist and the heroic acts of the onlookers, but mainly for the symbolic spectacle of a burning star and the image of a young woman trapped within it. However, the overall feeling Abramović herself would experience after the performance was one of bitter disappointment. She later commented upon this as follows: "I was very angry because I then understood there is a physical limit. When you lose consciousness, you can't be present. You can't perform." End quote. Deeply affected by this newfound realization for a newfound medium, she vowed that from now on, whatever her next project would be, she would make it her priority to use her body in and out of consciousness, but without it interrupting the performance. And thus, her next rhythm project, titled Rhythm 2, was conceptualized. Prompted by a loss of consciousness in Rhythm 5, Abramović devised the two-part Rhythm 2 performance to incorporate a state of unconsciousness in a performance. She performed the work at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb in 1974, just a few months after Rhythm 5. For this performance, Marina had somehow acquired 2 types of medication from a hospital. For the first half, lasting roughly 50 minutes, she ingested a form of pill usually prescribed for catatonia, a condition that causes extreme motor immobility, in which said pill is supposed to force catatonic patients to move. The reaction would be extremely intense. Within just a few short minutes, Abramović reacted violently to the medication, experiencing involuntary muscle movement and even seizures. Though unable to control her body, Abramović remained completely lucid and could observe what was happening to her body throughout the entire ordeal. Quote, "I sat at a little table in front of the audience and took pill number 1. In a couple of minutes, my body was jerking around involuntarily, almost falling out of my chair. I was aware of what was happening to me, but there was nothing I could do to stop it." End quote. When the effects of the pill finally wore off, part 2 of the performance commenced. This time she took the second pill, a medication normally prescribed for the treatment of extreme aggression, depression, and schizophrenia. When this medication took hold, she remained physically unchanged, but she became completely mentally removed and could not remember the lapsed time. Quote, "This time I went into a kind of passive trance, sitting there with a big smile on my face, aware of nothing. And this pill took 5 hours to wear off." End quote. By now, word of this new reckless young performance artist named Marina Abramović was beginning to spread like wildfire. Before long, many establishments across Europe who were open to the conceptual side of creativity were eager to see this daredevil of the art world for themselves. One such place would be the Galleria Diagramma in Milan, who agreed to host Marina's next rhythm experiment, titled Rhythm 4. In this piece, Abramović kneeled alone and naked in a white room with a high-power industrial fan in front of her. As a video camera rolled the live footage to an audience in a separate room, she approached the fan slowly, pressing her face against it, attempting to breathe in as much air as possible to push the limits of her lungs. Soon after, she passed out. Quote, "In a couple of minutes, the great torrent of air filling my inside caused me to lose consciousness. I had anticipated this, but as with Rhythm 2, the point of the piece had been to show me in 2 different states, consciousness and unconsciousness. I knew that I was experiencing new ways of using my body as a material. The problem was that, as with Rhythm 5, I was perceived to be in danger, and while in the earlier piece the danger had been real, this time it was only perceived. The Milan gallery staff, fearing for my well-being, rushed in and rescued me. It was not needed, it was not intended, but it all became part of a piece." End quote. Naturally, as the attention around Abramović's exhibitions continued to grow, so would her reputation, and back in Belgrade, it was mostly negative. The newspapers and media outlets spreading word of her performances would ridicule and demonize her. "What she is doing has nothing to do with art," they would say. "She's nothing but an exhibitionist and a masochist. She belongs in a mental hospital." As scandalous as her reputation appeared to be, criticisms such as these would only continue to grow and reach beyond her home country, and do so for the rest of Marina's career. Though it would be this exact reaction that would evoke the idea of her final chapter within the notorious Rhythm series, a piece that contestably stands as the most daring and perilous performance she has yet done, and one of the most bluntest displays ever produced in the art world of just how far the brutality of human nature can go if given the chance. Following the vocal reactions to her performances still fresh in her mind, Abramović could not help but wonder, what if instead of deciding what she would do to herself, what would happen if she let the public decide what to do to her? What would happen if she truly tested the limits of a relationship between the performer and the audience? That question would be answered in Studio Mora in Naples, Italy, with her piece titled Rhythm Zero. With an invitation from a gallery to perform whatever she wanted, Abramović got to work. The concept as a whole was relatively simple. Marina would stand in the middle of a room wearing black trousers and a black t-shirt, with the intention of being the object and the audience being the action. Nearby, in front of where Abramović was standing, she had placed 72 various objects on the table, which seemed to be a perfect mix of objects that represented either pleasure or pain. These items included, but were not limited to, a mirror, a feather, a fork, a bottle of perfume, a whip, a shawl, an axe, grapes, scissors, wine, needles, honey, a carving knife, a cake, a box of razor blades, lipstick, pins, sugar, and even a fully working pistol with a single bullet laying next to it, along with various other things ranging from utterly harmless to utterly dangerous. The instructions to this performance, now considered just as famous as the performance itself, were as follows. Instructions. There are 72 objects on the table that one can use on me as desired. Performance. I am the object. During this period, I take full responsibility. Duration. 6 hours, 8 PM to 2 AM. So at 8 o'clock in the evening, the performance commenced, and as the audience entered, they soon gathered around the table of objects. But things started rather timidly at first. Perhaps out of confusion or apprehension of seeing a strange young woman standing perfectly still behind a table of questionable objects, the audience during the first 3 hours of the show were being quite shy towards Marina. She would look back and comment on the performance as follows. I just stood there, staring into the distance, not looking at anything or anybody. Now and then, someone would hand me the rose, or drape a shawl around my shoulder, or kiss me. Then slowly, at first, and then quickly, things begin to happen. It was very interesting. End quote. From the available photographs that could be seen of this event, one thing you may have noticed is that surrounding Marina in most of these photos seemed to be predominantly a crowd of men. She would provide more insight into why this was so as follows. For the most part, the women in the gallery would tell the men what to do to me, rather than do it themselves. Although later on, when someone stuck a pin into me, one woman wiped the tears from my eyes. For the most part, these were just normal members of the Italian art establishments and their wives. Ultimately, I think the reason I wasn't was because the wives were there." End quote. As the evening went on and the early hours of the morning crept in, the atmosphere inside the gallery was beginning to grow more sinister with each passing minute. Quote, "A certain air of sexuality arose in the room. This came not from me, but from the audience. We were in southern Italy, where the Catholic Church was so powerful, and there was this strong Madonna or dichotomy in attitudes towards women." End quote. After 3 hours had passed, one man decided to cut her shirt apart with the scissors and ripped it off her. Because Abramović was staying entirely passive throughout the whole ordeal, people started manipulating her into various poses, puppeting her in whatever way they pleased, while she was completely exposed from the waist down. As she continued to stand there, someone took the lipstick and wrote "Io sono libero," meaning "I am free," on the mirror and placed it in her hand. Someone else took the lipstick shortly afterwards and wrote "End" across her forehead. Another then took Polaroids of Marina and stuck them in her hands, like she was holding playing cards. From there, things would go from bad to worse, and the atmosphere got increasingly intense. A couple of people then decided to pick her up and carry her around. Then they put her on the table, spread her legs, and stuck the knife in the table close to her groin. Then someone started sticking pins into her. Another then slowly poured a glass of water over her head. Another man proceeded to cut her neck with a knife and suck the blood, leaving a scar that Marina still carries to this day. She would also mention one particular member of the audience that would affect her the most, a man that eventually approached her, standing close to her for a long period of time and breathing heavily. After a while, the exact same man would take the bullet, load it into the pistol, and put it in Marina's right hand. He then proceeded to point the pistol towards her neck and touched the trigger. At that very moment, a concerned murmur erupted from the crowd, and someone would have to grab hold of him, causing a scuffle to break out. The man eventually had to be hustled out of the gallery so that the performance could continue. Towards the tail end of the performance, however, is where this experiment would go from extremely telling of how dangerous the supposedly normal, everyday person could be, to what would happen when that same person would face the reality of it. As Marina explains, quote, "In fact, the audience had become more and more active, as if in a trance. And then at 2 a.m, the gallerist came and told me that the 6 hours were up. I stopped staring and I looked directly at the audience. 'The performance is over,' the gallerist said. 'Thank you.' I looked like hell. I was half naked and bleeding. My hair was wet, and a strange thing happened. At this moment, the people who were still there suddenly became afraid of me. As I walked towards them, they ran out of the gallery." End quote. When it was all over, the gallerist then escorted Marina back to her hotel, where Marina went back to her room alone. Despite how exhausted she was, her mind was still racing, replaying moment after moment of the 6-hour-long experience. The event had in fact left her feeling so traumatized and affected that after a restless night's sleep, she woke up the next morning to discover that a streak of her black hair had turned grey. The gallery too would receive its own after effects of the event. The next day, the gallerists received dozens upon dozens of phone calls from those who participated, most of which were people who would apologize profusely for their actions, almost as if they didn't quite know what had come over them, as if something had taken control of them. But quite simply, according to Abramović, what had happened was human nature itself. At its most primal and elemental, it became part of a performance in the most interactive way possible. The art was now made by both performer and the audience, But the concept was so new to the audience that night that the consequences could have easily been far worse under different circumstances. The limits were tested just as planned, the risks were realized just as Marina had said, but ultimately, the results were far more disturbing than anyone could have ever predicted. And now both artist and the audience were deeply conflicted over the experience. As Marina would describe in her memoirs, quote, "Human beings are afraid of very simple things. We fear suffering. We fear mortality. What I was doing in Rhythm Zero, as in all my other performances, was staging these fears for the audience, using their energy to push my body as far as possible. In the process, I liberated myself from my fears, and as this happened, I became a mirror for the audience. If I could do it, they could do it too." End quote. Still married to Nesha Palapović and still sleeping under the same roof of her strict mother back in Belgrade, coming home at 10 p.m. each evening, Abramović was continuing to grow more distant from her place of origin, and more so after her eventful performance with Rhythm Zero. In her mind, Abramović felt truly nothing belonged to her anymore within her own country, even within her marriage to her college sweetheart. Whenever an opportunity abroad landed in her lap, she would take it without question, traveling anywhere she could and performing anything she could. It would seem her Rhythm series had well and truly kick-started her career, perhaps in the darkest direction possible, given the next string of side projects she would involve herself in during the early 70s. It would not be until 1976, when after moving to Amsterdam, Marina would find the most unlikely companion, a complete soulmate of creativity, who would practically help change the course of Marina's career forever, creating a dramatic story along the way that would be one of passionate romance, with the most bittersweet dissolution.